How's it going? Matthew, proprietor, writer, owner, reviewer, whatever you want to call it, for everydayaudiophile.com. Today, you may notice right here I am missing that amplifier, the Triode Lab EL84M-FFX. That's it's a bit of a mouthful. I'm not gonna lie. It's not my favorite name of an amplifier, but it does. Frank at Triode Lab, who does hand make the amplifiers, puts a great deal of care into it. He calls them that for good reason. It's a very standard naming scheme for him. Sorry, because it's right over here. I gotta clean it right. It's a very standard naming scheme for him. So EL84. Well, that's the EL84 tube. M. It's a mono amplifier. FFX. It is his top of the line. He's pulled out all of the bells and whistles as far as transformer upgrades are concerned. The circuitry, on the inside, if he's upgraded any caps, anything. This is as good as it gets. And it's very exciting for me to talk about it. I haven't really talked about it much on my website, which I really, really ought to do. I just haven't gotten around to it because, I mean, they're so good. It's hard to describe how good they are, and the price, I think, for the average person is maybe a little outside of what they're comfortable spending. I think Frank has them listed at $12,000 for the US pair. If I'm being completely honest, I think they punch well above their weight there. And I can go into more details soon, but let me pull it over here. It's a little heavy. Obviously, got big transformers on the top here. I'm gonna clean this pit first, right here. Yeah, that ought to do it. I'll get it more later. Oh, here we go. Okay. I'm gonna hold it up like this. I'm sure it won't fall. Right. Hopefully you get a top view there. Back view has your inlet and your power switch from the front. And on the side, if I can turn it around, because it is quite heavy. Give me just a moment. You have your input right here and your output right there in the middle. If you can see, let me hold it up there again. From the front to back, it is red, black, black, red. So the front one is the 8 ohm, I believe, and the back two are the 4 ohm. Now, I'm going to hold it up one more time. It is really quite hard to hold, but let's talk about let's go around the side of it. So we just went through the inputs and the outputs, but let's talk about what tubes are on here and why the transformers here make this really quite special. So if you saw on the back, we do have tube rectification. I would be remiss for telling you, I cannot remember which rectifier it is, but it is a pretty standard rectifier. I will look it up. That has a Hashimoto power transformer. On the inside of this is a choke. So on the inside of the chassis, if I were to open it up and show you inside, that's where the choke is. The output transformer, this is the, if I'm remembering the model, HW60-5. It is a 60 watt power transformer. It is really over specified for these tubes, at least when running an ultralinear, because that's what it is right here. Because this only puts out 26 watts. I'm going to move it to the side now. Those transformers are really quite heavy. It's a 60 watt power transformer that we're only really feeding 26 watts into. So it has plenty of overhead. And you know what this really gives us that I don't get in my tube amps like the Luxman SQ N150. I don't get that, obviously, in this tiny little tube cube. I think it's going to make an appearance every single episode because it is just so darn cute. I don't get that kind of... I don't get the same kind of performance from... Let's see, MusiShare, which is a Chinese company. They make a little EL84 amp. I don't get that performance from it, even though it is nice. Any amp that I've tried prior to this one, they've always sounded great, right? Mids, lower mids, even mid bass, all the way up to treble. Sounds great. No issues there. Where it starts to fall apart is in that bass performance, and that's what this transformer does. It has so much room for bass performance, or for just bass response, right? You get a smaller transformer, what happens is it starts to saturate the lower end of the spectrum you go. And these power transformers, they're rated for a power output, so 60 watts, at a certain frequency, 50 hertz, 60 hertz, 70 hertz. The lower you go below that, the easier it is to saturate the windings in that transformer. The thing that makes this one special, and I should look it up, but you can look it up after this if you want. I do believe it is 60 watts at 30 hertz, maybe 40 hertz. It's somewhere in that range. And that's really quite special because anything smaller than this is 60, 70, 80 hertz, right? And it's less wattage. So the fact that I'm able to really utilize these EL84s to their maximum and allow them to go as deep as they want to go, it is chef's kiss. It is really amazing. Let's talk about the driving tubes, the driver tubes. On the very front is an ECC81. I personally have chosen an RFT tube. How would I describe it? They are very sharp sounding. They kind of remind me, I mean, it's nothing like a Mollard. It is more like RCA. It kind of reminds me of an RCA tube, but these ones are easier to come by. You know, I have probably a dozen of them. They're all well matched, or at least I have matched pairs. So if I put one in the left monoblock, I have another one to put in the right monoblock, and I like how they sound. Behind that is a 12BH7, and this one right here, it's RCA. I don't remember exactly where or what year, but it's RCA. Sounds pretty good. To me, it hasn't made as much of a difference tube rolling that specific tube, because it's, you have your preamp tube and then you have the driver tube. It hasn't made a huge difference for me. Maybe I just haven't found the right tubes, but that is the glory in tube rolling. Am I right? Behind that is a quartet of EL84s. I think technically you can describe this as parallel push-pull. And so push-pull is usually 2 tubes. As you increase from that in quantities of 2, it becomes parallel push-pull. So that is where we get the 4 tubes from. This board, or at least this amp, mine is specified in ultra linear. You can get it in triode, and I think in triode it's 10 to 12 watts at 8 ohms, or whatever your taps are out of the output transformer. Let's say 12 watts. I do believe it's 12 watts. I'd have to go ask Frank again. And if you wanted to, you could run it in pentode, which I think is going to be closer to 50 watts or 55 watts. I've heard good things about pentode, at least running EL84s at pentode, as long as you do it right, that it can sound like a 300B. I don't know if that's true. I've never actually, besides in really, really cheap amps or maybe guitar amps, I've never really heard the EL84 in pentode. It's always running ultra linear, or it's always running triode, or triode strapped, I guess is what it technically is. Not a true triode, but triode strapped. that is this amp. How now? Let's kind of go over its performance characteristics. I would consider, probably the first thing that people ask about when you think of tubes is distortion. What is the distortion like? Kind of going back to their preamp that I showed in one of the last videos, I believe. It's one of the lower distortion tube amps I've ever heard. To me, it is on par distortion wise with like an audio research amplifier, which is huge. Good job, Frank. But more musical. The way that I like to describe audio research is that it is a solid state sounding tube amplifier. It's like if you wanted a solid state amplifier that had the characteristics of a tube amp, it's kind of what our audio research is in my book, at least, the amps that I'm familiar with, the VSI 60, and that one of their reference 75, Ref 75. Those two that I'm familiar with, they are excellent amps. Definitely tube amps. You will never mistake them, but they are very solid state-esque tube amps compared to something that could be full-on triode, like a 2A3 or a 300B. You'll never mistake those. They just sound lush. No bass, but lush. Back to the power transformer. 60 watts. I mentioned that in Pento this is 50-ish watts, and that's why I chose the 60 watt, was in case I wanted to run it as a Pentode. Don't think I'll ever go to Triode for it. It's just not my cup of tea with the EL84. These 4 tubes, in one of my last videos, I mentioned that I use the Russian military EL84. It's like 6N14P. There is a specific version of it, which is the hardened version, that has a longer lifespan, and that's what these are. That's what I have 10 to 12 quad sets of. So that's the bass performance, right? The bass performance is due in large part to this transformer. Let's talk about mids and highs. I'm not going to say that this is better than some of the other EL84 amps that I have. Don't get me wrong, it's great. Like when I compare just the mids, right? Let's say 500 plus hertz to 400 plus hertz, up there. When I compare that to an amp that's like, gonna go back to the Luxman SQ150, and also, God, I can't believe I'm referencing this brand. Glow Audio has 2 amplifiers, the Amp 1 and the Amp 2. I have both of them. When I compare the mid-range of this to those in music that isn't super loud, you can't really push those amplifiers that hard due to their design. Same with the Musi Share, their little EL84 amp that has 2 rectifiers. You can't push those very hard. But when you're playing music that is a little bit softer and you're playing on speakers that are a little bit more sensitive, I'm going to say 88, 89, 90 plus. The mids there, kind of reminiscent of here, right? Obviously, these are just going to be, I think it's just a little bit more detailed, but the same sense where I'm closing my eyes and I can really be taken out of my seat. I think that's really just due in part to the EL84 and the characteristics that it kind of imposes on that music. So it is quick. It is just dreamy to listen to vocals on these mono blocks. So, if that's what you're looking for, mid-range performance, you got it. You got it, and I have never run out of juice with these amps. I used to have Vandersteen Trios. That used to be my standard speaker for 5 years, 6 years. That was my reference speaker. I upgraded from Riga RS7s. I had trios for a really long time. Now I still had bookshelves on the side, but when I wanted reference, that's what it was. And those are notoriously low. 84 dB, 83 to 85, no issues. These played just fine. They could go as loud as I wanted them to go, and there was no issue. Highs. The highs here are great. I prefer highs that are very, I don't want too airy. It's a little bit too Triode-esque for me. I think it's a common theme. Like, I enjoy the Triode tubes for what they are, but for the vast majority of my music, it just sounds messy to me. So I can't do it. I want something that sounds a little bit more exact, that's gonna, not roll off too much in the high end. I want those cymbals to be very precise, I guess you could say. You get that, and that's why I have this RFT tube on the front, right? Preamp tube. I have a tube that imparts that characteristic. I have power tubes that impart that characteristic. It is just my preference. I think any tube, if you were to put molars in here, you would get something that has a smooth top end that people just say is the best experience for your ears ever. I don't know if I can agree with that, but the nice thing is the engineering on this amplifier really brings out the characteristics in each tube that you have. And compared to other tube amplifiers that I've had, this amp makes it easy and difficult to tube roll. Easy in that you can hear the difference in every tube. Difficult in that it doesn't hide it. I can't go buy new production EL84s or driver, 12BH7s and ECC81s. What is that, a 12AU7? 12AT7? I think it's 12AU7 is the equivalent. I can't go buy new productions of those tubes for the exact reason that they sound terrible. And it's because of that it's unfortunate. The vintage market is getting more and more expensive, which is why I've tried to stock up as much as I can, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles there. What else do I want to talk about here? Anything that Frank makes over at Triode Labs, he's a joy to work with. He bends over backwards to build the tube amplifier that you've always wanted. And he's very honest in his opinions or in his advice when he asks you what you're looking for. When I asked him for, I want to do this amplifier, it didn't exist yet. And I worked with him over the course of the better part of a year, 9 months at least, where he refined the circuit. We refined the tubes that we're going to use. He even allowed me to kind of make the selection of, do you want, obviously there's 4 EL84s, but do I want the driver and preamp section to be the 12AU7, 12BH7 that I have right here that I've chosen, or do I want it to be a 12AX7, just a single one? Because there's a difference in how that sounds. I got to pick the transformers. I got to pick the caps. I got to pick, if it matters to you, the input and outputs. Maybe you wanted a different brand or a different IEC inlet. Anything that you want within reason, he's able to do and accommodate, and he's just a great person to work with. Truly, I've had a few of his amps besides these. Unsurprisingly, all of them have been EL84 amps. I have yet to try one of his Triode amps, which is what he's most well known for, especially the 2A3. It's probably something that I'm going to reach out to him and see if I can't get, or one of his other preamps. someday when I have time and I kind of clear the clutter here in the room. But yeah, that's the Triode Lab amplifier. I highly recommend that you check them out if tubes are your thing. They're not going to be Chinese prices. They're not going to be cheap. But for the dollar that you're going to spend, they are far better than anything that you're going to get otherwise. If I had any criticism of his preamplifiers, which I'm looking at over here, it's behind the camera, sitting on the entertainment cabinet. It would be that the potentiometer isn't motorized, and there's a very good reason why he doesn't do that. But that would be my only complaint. I thought it was going to be a showstopper for me, a blocker for me. Look, there's the engineering talk, I guess, coming through. But it wasn't, right? You set the volume, you put down the needle, and you sit back, and there's no need to change the volume. But with that said, Frank, thank you again. I'm sorry I haven't gotten around to reviewing these, and to anyone else that is seriously considering a tube amplifier, especially Triode or EL84, because that's what I love, give Frank a call or an email. It's Triode Labs or Finale Audio. They're both the same company. They're sister companies of each other. I highly recommend it. No, none of this was paid or sponsored. This is just my own honest review of working with Frank, listening to his gear, and just falling in love with it. It truly is that special. All right. Thank you. See you next time.